צריכים להיות ערוכים למערכה ממושכת. אנחנו נמשיך לפעול בתקיפות ובשיקול דעת עד השלמת משימתנו.
هدنة إنسانية لمدة 24 ساعة.
What Hamas have been doing throughout the day, which they supposedly declared a ceasefire, they were taking all of the preparations in order to carry out further attacks against the state of Israel and against its civilians.
Good evening. You're watching I-24 News. I'm Lucia Arish, and this is day 22 of Operation Protective Edge. Despite reports in Israeli media in the last hour, it appears that there is no agreement on a ceasefire yet. Earlier today, a spokesman for Palestinian factions announced a 72-hour truce, but this was quickly shot down by Hamas. Meanwhile, the fighting has continued without let-up. Last night, the IDF took out Gaza's power plant and also bombed the house of Hamas Gaza leader Ismail Haniyeh. IDF troops also continue to neutralize the tunnels Hamas dug under the Israel border. And with me in the studio right now are Dan Gillerman, former Israeli ambassador to the UN. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
Zvi Mazel, former Israeli ambassador to Egypt. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also Yoav Limon, military analyst for Israel Hayom. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. So let's start with the Israeli media headlines that all the sides agreed on a ceasefire. It's not happening.
Doesn't look as if it's happening. We've had many attempts and many so-called ceasefires. I was very skeptical about this ceasefire to begin with, because I really don't think that Israel should see in Hamas, even if their message is delivered through the Palestinian Authority, a partner for a ceasefire. I think we should, if we do go towards a solution, we should go for a much wider front. We should get the Egyptians on board, we should get the Americans on board, hopefully the Europeans, maybe even some of the Gulf countries, and actually try and come out of this with a wider base and a whole new reality in the region. I think we have an opportunity here to see beyond a military victory, a political and diplomatic victory for Israel. And the victory will actually be the fact that we do not go back 3 weeks to where we were, but actually go forward to a totally new reality in the Middle East. And I think that can only be with the cooperation and maybe the leadership of Egypt and obviously the United States and some other countries. So Hamas is really not, we should not even have a dialogue with Hamas.
You mentioned Egypt, and Egypt, it seems that everyone talked today about the Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire and the role that Egypt should play in this ceasefire. And it seems that in one way or another, Khalid Mash'al also asked for a ceasefire, and by, let's say, the back door, basically agreeing on the Egyptian proposal.
Listen, I'm not sure about Mash'al and even not about Haniyeh. I don't know what they want. They continue, still they continue to fight. They fight because they are very well dig in. Their leadership is intact, and they are fighting because they are Muslim fanatics, and because they are paying with Palestinian blood. For them, Hamas is not a national Palestinian movement. It's an Islamic movement. It was set up to destroy Israel, and it was working on it till now. So every few years, when it feels it's a very strong, it attacks Israel. The problem is not to reach with Israel to a long-term understanding, but if they fail to finish what they want, they will ask probably for a ceasefire for 1 year or 2 years, and then we'll start again. We are now in a very difficult situation, because we have discovered during that operation that the terrible tunnels are really a strategic, I'm emphasizing, a strategic threat to Israel. We cannot stop it before we destroy most of it. We don't know how many they have. You see, and this is the first thing now about the rocket and missile threat. Maybe that can be, maybe, I'm not absolutely sure, it can be solved through a diplomatic agreement. I'm not sure because Hamas is not the right partner. Egypt is very strong about its initiative of ceasefire. They've said, okay, we understand there is a kind of war, let's stop and then discuss all possibilities. But the fact is Hamas said no. We said yes. So we are ready to discuss, but now it's impossible.
So before we continue discussing the Egyptian part in this ceasefire, yes or no, today we're starting to hear a little bit of criticism coming from the military. Headlines in the Israeli media are talking about that Israeli government knew about the tunnels and it decided maybe to act a little bit, let's say, late.
I think it's premature planning for the investigation to come by members who are about to be investigated in such an investigative committee that wasn't formed yet. I suggest the army to step back and remember that it's an army being commanded by a government, and it doesn't work the other way around. It's Israel, it's a democracy, and the army shouldn't forget that. I heard a high-ranked officer, that's how we call it today, telling the government decide, either pull back or go ahead. I mean, the way I was taught is that the army should obey what is being ordered by the government. It doesn't, and I'm telling it here
this is something that the chief of staff is always saying.
The chief of staff should do what the government tells him to do and not turn the things the other way around. And it goes back to the tunnels as well. I mean, the tunnels, at the end of the day, is something between a tactical and an operative thing. At the end, we are talking about a strategic war, which should on which we should look on a much higher level. Israel has, on one hand, a domestic problem. The Israeli public supports in huge majority the operative moves, and it wants the government and the army to go on and crack down Hamas. That's what the Israeli public wants, and that's what the Israeli public expects from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a right-winger. He doesn't come from the Labour. He comes from the Likud. That's on one hand, and that's what the stomach feels, definitely after 10 dead soldiers that we've witnessed yesterday. On the other side, the head, when you have to breathe deeply, says, finish with your mission, which is the tunnels, and pull back. You have nothing to look for in Gaza, and that's what the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and the Chief of Staff is looking for currently. They need the world. It's very easy to fight the world and fight the US and fight the UN and fight the EU.
Fight the Israeli public opinion.
And fight the Israeli public opinion. At the end of the day, I believe that Prime Minister understands that Israel needs legitimacy, and the time gets shorter. And the shorter it is, the harder it will be for Israel to fight. That's why Israel, in a way, is looking for a way to get out of that war. And when we talk of Hamas, just one thing. We try, Mr. Mazel is an Arabist. He understands them much better than I do. We Israelis tend to think that we know them better than they know themselves. I suggest that I wasn't talking about you, I was talking about us. Hamas, we are trying to get Hamas as weak as possible. The Egyptian offer was for ceasefire, and then we will start talking. But Hamas entered that war because it was so weak, it had nothing to lose. So if it comes out with the same nothing, Hamas won't stop fighting. If we want Hamas to stop fighting, Hamas has to get out with something, maybe a minimal thing, but something in hand. Otherwise, it won't be over.
Yes, gentlemen, just excuse me for 1 second. I just want to go to our correspondent, Shai Ben-Ari, who's right now in Soroka Hospital in Beersheba. What are the latest developments there, Shai?
Yes, Lucy, well, here at Soroka Hospital, basically the situation is we have 26 soldiers currently interned, injured soldiers. We're talking about 1 in critical condition, 4 in difficult condition, and we're talking about 9 characterized as medium-grade injuries. The rest are characterized as light injuries. That is the situation right now here, and we're talking about numbers that have actually been stable since around noontime. So basically, we're talking about a fairly quiet day in terms of injuries on the injury front, I want to stress.
Other than that, I would say a number of dignitaries have been visiting this day, including Minister Silvan Shalom, who of course was born and raised in Beersheba and showed some solidarity here with the injured soldiers today. Other than that, also a number of Israeli pop stars have actually been visiting the people here to sort of raise their spirits, Eyal Golan, Sarit Haddad, if those names mean anything, as well as the regular procession of basically locals and volunteers bringing food, bringing candy, bringing all sorts of entertainment devices, clowns, that kind of thing. This has sort of become something of a ritual. Maybe not recently, this is something of a ritual in general in Israeli society in times of crisis. And basically, you can say it brings out the best of Israel in general when we basically find ourselves in these times.
Yes, Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very much for this. And we're moving directly to Shahar Peled in the city of Sderot. Shahar?
Yes, Lucy, good evening. We're here in the city center of Sderot, which has suffered today once again, rocket fire towards the city. 3 rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip. 2 fell in open areas and 1 was intercepted. And with us now is Gal Tsuri, a resident of one of the southern kibbutz villages in the south and a high school teacher. Gal, what can you tell us about life under fire? Some are telling us this day is a quiet day with only 3 rockets fired at the city.
The kibbutz where we live is a kind of different than Sderot because we live closer to the border, and it's harder because the missiles aren't a problem. I can say we got used to it. It's horrible, I know, but the tunnels and the fighting is something that we can't live with, and the feeling is that we can't live like that anymore. It's a threat that I don't think anybody around the world would accept, and to look at our kids and say, hey, here you can grow with in a playground where a tunnel can be dug to, is horrible. It's a horrific thought, you know.
Thank you very much, Gal. As we can see, life here under fire is something you cannot get used to. As much as they try here to come back as business as usual, it's still very difficult as the fighting goes on. Back to you.
Yes, Shahar Peled, thank you very much for this. Mr. Mazalia,
you wanted to say something about the Egyptian position, which is very important and not always understood. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi wanted to be president, not to play games. Okay, he wanted to be president in order to renew Egypt, to put it on the road of growth, economic growth. If he fails in it, within 2 years the people of Egypt will rise, and it will be a disaster for Egypt, for Israel, and for all the Middle East. So the last chance of Egypt is now, on the economic level and social, which is the most important for Egypt, is Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Now the problem, Gaza for him is a base of terrorism for Sinai, you see? So it's also a strategic threat as well as for Israel. So he understands very well what we should do, and he probably is very happy that we are doing what we do, but he cannot stop. If it stops, if we stop it, if he's ready to stop it, General Fattah el-Sisi, it should be once Hamas is weakened and will not disturb his effort to develop Egypt, to change Egypt, to renew Egypt. So Egypt now, this is my last sentence, yes. Egypt is acting now according to its national interest, not according to Palestinian interest. This is the big change of Egypt, in Egypt.
Before we will further discuss this, I want to look at maybe the diplomatic problems that Israel has with Washington. And it seems that there is a blaming game right now between Washington and Israel. Jerusalem is saying that they didn't ask for a ceasefire from Secretary of State John Kerry. John Kerry is saying that Israel asked a week ago for a ceasefire. This doesn't put the United States-Israel relationship in, let's say, good mood or in a good stage for, even if we want to talk about the recent years about the relationship between these two countries.
Well, Lucy, there's no love affair between the Prime Minister and the President of the United States, but I think there still is a very real love affair between Israel and the American people. And administrations come and go. The bond between the two people is, I think, as strong as ever, and I think the President and the Secretary actually understand that. So in the eagerness of Secretary Kerry to try and achieve, and I commend him for his passion and for his eagerness to try and bring about a ceasefire, I think mistakes may have been made. It was certainly a mistake, also further to what Ambassador Mazel said, to put Egypt aside when Egypt took a leadership role, and a very brave and courageous one, and go to Qatar and Turkey and seek a solution. But I think that at the end of the day, it's not about who got insulted or who won points. It's truly about doing the right thing, and I'm sure that the United States wants Israel to come out of this victorious, if there is such a thing as victory, but at least with the upper hand. And having said that, I think that one of the things we have to realize is that, what we are in, and certainly what we're watching on these screens, is not a movie. Once it's over, reality. It's over. I mean, you cannot rewind it. And it's reality, and it's life, and it's horrible. But not only we are in it, the whole world is watching it, and the world expects Israel, most of the world, with the exception maybe of Iran and Qatar, wants to see Hamas, if not crushed, they want to see it crushed. I can tell you that when I was at the UN, the main complaint I got from sheikhs and emirs and sultans and prime ministers and presidents of Arab states was, why didn't you finish the job? You had the time. Go, finish the job. Don't stop. And if we do, and if we leave Hamas not in a very weakened position, I think that we will disappoint not only the Israeli public, but the rest of the world. The world is watching. This is unreeling in front of the world. And therefore, I think we have to seek a solution, and we have to seek an outcome that is far. We cannot finish this with a draw or even with a few points. This has to be decisive, and this has to totally change the reality on the ground.
So you have, if they're asking why you didn't finish the job, can't Israel finish the job with Hamas?
There is no question. I mean, Israel is a huge state, and Hamas is a small organization. Don't mistaken yourself by the fact that last night at 2:30 a.m. you were woken up by sirens.
Sirens.
That's reality. But at the end, nothing happened in Israel. Iron Dome intercepted again those missiles, and Israel cracked down on Gaza last night by its Air Force. So there is no balance between Israel and Hamas. It's a matter of decision. When Israel decided to crack down a terror organization in the West Bank, that's what happened 10 years ago.
But what happens when this terror organization is so frustrated because it cannot get the target that it's
Lucy, there is no balance of power. Israel is a strong state with airplanes, tanks, artillery, and Hamas has its terrorists, and terrorists. That's what it has. It can take a huge price from Israel in the life of soldiers, maybe civilians, and with the time that it will take for that mission to be fulfilled. But at the end, Israel will win. The question is, in what price? What are we going to do then, controlling 1.8 million Palestinians that we have to feed, give them health, give them security, give them education, etc., etc. And if the positive scenario that we think of, that the sane Palestinians of Abu Mazen won't take over, but let's say what we see in Iraq, Daesh, or Somalia will happen in Gaza, and we have something of a gang war that will be the worst of all worlds. So Israel is now looking for, as far as I understand the Israeli policy, and it's not always easy to understand, to look for the solution which looks less bad between the solution. There is no good solution in that war. I look at the number, day 22, Operation Cascade took 22 days. The Second Lebanon War took 34 days. We are getting in huge steps towards the Second Lebanon War, which left a huge scar in Israel.
Before I will ask you, should we continue calling it an operation and not a war? I want to take this one step ahead, because we know that today it deteriorated even more for the Palestinians who are living in Gaza. The fuel tanks at Gaza's only power plant came under attack early Tuesday, threatening to deepen an already dire humanitarian situation. I-24 News correspondent Ron Friedman reports.
Sporadic power outages in Gaza are set to become permanent after Israeli tank fire hit a fuel depot, decommissioning the Strip's only power plant on Tuesday. The thick column of black smoke caused by the explosion and the massive ensuing fire could be seen from a great distance, overshadowing even the plumes raised by Israeli airstrikes and artillery fire. The plant's director warned that hospital and basic health facilities could be seriously affected by the damage to the plant.
I would like to say to the world that this was a humanitarian plant that served the people of Gaza and helped them lead their normal, simple lives. Striking the plant in this way means that we lost the electricity supply, which we were relying on, even if it only supplied 3 hours worth a day.
Gaza's power plant suffered a hit last week and has been working at a reduced capacity of about 20% ever since. It is believed the current damage may take months to repair. In normal times, the Palestinian enclave relies on Israel for most of its electricity, but damage to power infrastructure over the past 3 weeks of fighting have made delivering the 120,000 megawatts of electricity impossible. Gazans, who may have become accustomed to power rationing, will now have to get used to a whole new reality of life in darkness.
And joining me right now on the phone is Chris Ganis from UNRWA spokesman. Good evening, Mr. Ganis. Good to have you back.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mr. Ganis, so can you tell us what is the latest humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip?
Look, a very clear series of messages. This is a real cry from the heart. There are 200,000 displaced people now in our shelters. We get media reports that 200,000 more people are receiving messages to leave their homes. We have reached breaking point. The time has come for us to say to the parties pursuing this war, especially the government of Israel, that maybe it's time for them to assume direct responsibilities to deal with hundreds of thousands of people that have been displaced because of this fighting. It's time for others to honor their international law responsibilities to deal with the consequences of civilians on civilians of their military decisions. In other words, we are overwhelmed. If we're going to get 200,000 people displaced, tens of thousands of people may be stranded in the streets of Gaza without food, without water, without access to UN shelter. There'll be risks of disease. So enough is enough. We're completely overwhelmed. UNRWA, I can confirm, another staff member has been killed, bringing the total to 5. They've made the ultimate sacrifice. We've appealed incessantly to the political echelons with the power to end this fighting. We warned, our voice was not heard. We're now overwhelmed. It's up to others, especially the government of Israel, to assume its responsibilities for what is happening to civilians as a direct result of what's happening on the ground.
Yes, Mr. Ganis, you encounter with the people and you meet the people each and every day in the Gaza Strip. Who do they blame about this current situation?
We're not laying blame. That's the tragedy of our position. We're simply here to mop up the consequences of other people's military decisions on civilians. And that's why we're saying we're overwhelmed. It's a cri de coeur, it's a cry from the heart. Enough is enough. We are mopping up the consequences of other people's military decisions. And we're saying under international law, it's up to those who are pursuing this conflict to honor their obligations towards civilians. We're overwhelmed. It can't go on. We're losing staff. Our shelters are completely overflowing. And, you know, we've nowhere else to turn. And if more people are displaced because they're being told to leave their homes, there are going to be tens of thousands of people on the streets of Gaza in the open air without food, without water, without access to government facilities. You know, things are about to turn absolutely desperate. UNRWA simply cannot cope.
Mr. Ganis, do you find any resistance from Hamas militants to providing help to the civilians in the Gaza Strip?
Look, it's an impossible situation providing help to civilians in the Gaza Strip. There's all sorts of things going on near civilian installations, which bring civilians in harm's way. There are munitions flying in, which have taken an inordinate toll on civilians. So it's almost impossible to be delivering aid. And, you know, in addition to all that, the numbers are overwhelming. We simply cannot cope. It's going to be up to, you know, as international law says, the parties...
Yeah, but do Hamas militants put some obstacles on the ground for you to provide this help? Because
yeah, I mean, look, we've reported on rockets being found in our schools. I mean, if ever there was an obstacle to helping people, I mean, there's a pretty significant one, which we strongly condemn as a flagrant violation of the neutrality of our premises. You know, this is wrong, and we've condemned it. just as we have said that violations of our neutrality in the way that our compounds are being directly hit, we're not saying deliberately, by Israeli forces, is also to be condemned because it puts civilians in harm's way. Look what happened in Beit Hanun last week.
Yes, Mr. Chris Gonis, thank you very much for this phone call.
Thanks a lot then. Bye-bye.
Thank you. These images, if we want to talk about the PR game that Hamas is also playing, these images are severely damaging the PR, the Israeli PR, or the Israeli state of mind, or the Israeli opinion that Israel is trying to get out there for the international community.
These images are horrific. But if you noticed while you were interviewing Mr. Gunnis, there was a banner there saying, rockets found in an UNRWA school for the third time.
Yeah.
Now, Golda Meir said all those years ago that there will not be peace until the Arabs learn to love their children more than they hate us. It looks as if they have not learned that, because anybody who puts rockets in a school, anybody who makes children go to sleep with a rocket, does not love their children. And if you go to sleep with a rocket, don't be surprised if you don't wake up in the morning. Now, I think that those pictures are horrific. And luckily, we cannot compete with those pictures, mainly because of Iron Dome. Just imagine, we've had over 2,000 rockets shelled at Israel, including Jerusalem just now. And
yes.
Including Tel Aviv and Haifa and our major cities and every village. If we did not have the Iron Dome, we would unfortunately be seen in that light. But, we built the Iron Dome in order to protect our women and children. They've built rockets in order to kill our women and children. And I think the world understands that while for us the death of every Palestinian child is a horrible mistake and a tragedy, for them the death of every Israeli child is a victory and a cause for celebration. And, I was representing Israel at the UN during the Second Lebanon War. The minute there was this missile or this bomb on Qana, the war was practically over. This time we've seen pictures time and time again, and they have not created the same kind of reaction. They have not brought about a stop or a very, very harsh demand for Israel to stop, mainly because people realize that there's no symmetry here. There's a democracy fighting for its home. And, the real question you have to ask anybody is, what would you do? What would you do if Chicago was shelled over the lake by Canada, or if Los Angeles was shaken from Mexico, or if Britain was? What would they do? Would you wait for 1 minute? We waited not for 10 seconds, not for 10 hours. We waited for 10 days until we went in. We gave them every chance. We accepted every ceasefire. But these people probably have very little care very little about their own people, use them as human shields, and I think the world understands it. Otherwise, there would be a real outcry. The fact that there isn't means that people have started to understand what Israel is facing.
You have, yes, I would. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would like to add, it's a perfect description of what's going on. But I would like to ask some question. Hamas built for many years many shelters under the ground. But who are in it? The leadership of Hamas, not the civilian population. The civilian population is outside. So we are to be punished because we built a lot of shelters and we defend ourselves and we know how to avoid missiles. This is a story. So there is something distorted in the international media. I don't want to put names, but we know exactly what happens. There is an imbalanced presentation of the situation. Yes, we shouldn't. If there are more Israelis who are dead or refugees in their own country, it will better the situation in the Middle East? No, we have the right to defend ourselves. And this is not shown enough in the international press.
We already talked, we started this conversation by saying there's a certain criticism coming from the military about continuing this operation. Can this criticism hurt the spirit of the fighters, the spirit of the soldiers who are fighting on the ground?
I hope not. I hope they are blocked from receiving rumors or bad words from the home front into their actual front. You asked before whether it's an operation or a war. Definitely in the eyes of the soldiers, it's a war.
It's a war.
They're engaged in a war. The bigger it gets in scale, an operation which involves 5 million Israelis in shelter day by day.
Because
and the whole
strategically,
economy,
is there a strategical importance to say it's a war or an operation?
No, I'll go down to the actual
terms.
Yeah, terms or the way that we deal with them. Professional people. A war is something that involves the whole resources of a country. When you go into a war, the country is recruited, etc. At the beginning, it was an operation. I mean, Israel attacked Gaza. Some of the people of Israel were involved, and the rest of their country was out of it. Once 5 million people are under a coverage of rockets being fired from Gaza and going in and out shelters because of sirens, and the economy pays a huge price, because Mr. Gilliman is an expert in economy. He'll understand much better than I do the price of 10 billion shekels and more of that operation. And once we see over 50 dead soldiers and dead civilians, it gets closer and closer to the actual definition of a war. So at the end, I believe it will be called a war, if not officially. Practically, that's the first Gaza war of Israel.
Yes.
We've had two Lebanese war. But if we go down, 2 quick remarks about what was said here. Danny Gilliman said that Iron Dome protects Israeli civilians, and rightly so. Iron Dome protects in a crazy way Palestinian lives as well, because if we would have got killed here, no, Israel would have wiped them out. Israel would have gotten into Gaza in much bigger forces, killing unfortunately many more civilians, because that's the price of war. So in a cynical, crazy, unbelieved way, Iron Dome protects civilians in Gaza, not only in Israel. That's one remark. Second remark is that we see pictures only in the world, only when they're against Israel. Yesterday, you were broadcasting about the Shifa hospital being hit by Israel. Once it was proved that it was hit by Hamas, the story was over. Nobody cared about it anymore. It's unbelievable, but that's our reality.
Yes, unfortunately, this is the reality. And of course, I hope that we won't have a lot of days discussing about this, but we will wait for the investigation that will start.
We'll hope for the outcome.
For the outcome or the investigation.
Not always a need for an investigation.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for this. Operation Protective Edge has drawn expressions of support for Israel from some countries, but also harsh condemnation from others. The current situation may be similar to that which characterized Operation Cast Lead. Let's I-24 News reporter Daniel Campus takes a look.
As Operation Protective Edge continues, condemnation, support, and formal abstentions towards the situation in Gaza have emerged from around the world. And some of the countries are continuing with the same rhetoric they used in the past. So far, the same nations that supported Israel during the Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009, such as United States, Canada, UK, and the European Union, remain solid in their backing of Israel's right to defend itself from Hamas rockets.
I reaffirmed my strong support for Israel's right to defend itself. No nation should accept rockets being fired into its borders or terrorists tunneling into its territory. In fact, while I was having the conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, sirens went off in Tel Aviv.
But during that operation, 3 countries broke diplomatic ties with Israel, among them Qatar, which suspended political and economic ties, Mauritania, which recalled its ambassador and expelled the Israeli embassy, and South America's Bolivia and Venezuela, who also recalled their ambassador and cut off diplomatic ties with Israel. Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan's angry attack on Israeli President Shimon Peres at the European Economic Forum in Davos are a reminder of the diplomatic crisis sparked by Operation Cast Lead. But since 2009, much has changed. Countries that used to be key players in the region have been weakened and replaced. Khaled Mashal no longer lives in Damascus, and lately Hamas seems to be closer to Qatar than to the Iranian and Syrian regimes. Protesting Operation Protective Edge, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza and called on the Islamic world to arm Palestinians fighting the Zionist regime. The usual left-leaning governments in South America, including those of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Ecuador, and Venezuela, have also issued statements condemning Israel. Brazil went so far as to recall its ambassador in Tel Aviv, and President Dilma Rousseff condemned Israel's offensive in Gaza as a massacre. Ecuador also withdrew its ambassador from Tel Aviv on July 18th to protest the Israeli offensive. President Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela also issued a strong statement.
It's not a war between two armies. Israel has the war's most modern weapons and uses it in a very precise way. The missiles reach where they want them to reach. Undoubtedly, they're committed genocide.
Comments like those by Navi Pillay, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, has also had an impact on the diplomatic stance of many nations.
All these dead and maimed civilians should weigh heavily on all our consciences. I know that they weigh heavily on mine.
It is still too early to know what the diplomatic aftermath of the current situation will be, since the current conflict is not over. Yet many analysts are predicting that an investigation similar to that conducted by Judge Richard Goldstone after Operation Cast Lead will take place once a long-term ceasefire is agreed on.
Welcome back to this special edition of I-24 News. Of the news today, we continue this extended coverage of Operation Protective Edge. And right now, joining me in the studio, I have the honor to have Ophir Akunis, Deputy Minister in the Office of Prime Minister and member of the Israeli Parliament from the Likud Party. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming to our studio. Mr. Akunis, we saw today that there is starting some kind of a blame game. And one of the blames that the government is facing is that they already knew about the tunnel. And my question is, what took so long to start handling and actually do a big operation against these tunnels and against these, let's say, dangerous things and targets against Israel?
In my mind, the most important thing is that we end this operation without any tunnels. The inner discussion in Israel, this discussion, like everything else in Israel, I suppose it's going to happen. But at this moment, when the mission is still happening, and it is, even today, this very day, we still expose tunnels. I think that this discussion we're going to put aside. It's going to take years. We've been starting with it from 2001, if we go back in time. At the moment, when our soldiers are now operating, first of all, let them do their mission until it's finished. We are approaching it.
And if the Prime Minister will decide to end this operation in, let's say, the next 2 days or the next 24 hours, like we're hearing now and then, although we heard it a lot for the last few days, will you agree about this move?
Well, look, it has to be, of course, it depends, of course, on the conditions of the ceasefire, because there's no situation in world history that battle did not end eventually. Any battle, any war, eventually does end. And at the end, there's a kind of political arrangement and maybe a political paper. This paper, when we get to it, if we do, at the moment we haven't reached this situation, it has to be based on the fact that the Gaza Strip with an international umbrella will be demilitarized from all weaponry. And if this actually happens, this is an Israeli sine qua non, then I suppose that as far as Israel is concerned, we have reached a great achievement. There'll be no ceasefire without it. Another thing is that the ceasefire should only be after, or maybe we shall continue after the ceasefire to expose those tunnels. I think these are the two conditions that I would not give up anyway before the decision on a ceasefire.
So let's take a scenario that Israel ends up this operation and get rid of all the tunnels and take care of all the tunnels. And Israel will need to reach also to a diplomatic solution. We heard that the Israeli government was not willing to sit down with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, as long as he's sitting with Hamas in his government. Do you see a situation after this operation, and we are seeing the destruction that is happening in the Gaza Strip and also that is happening to Israel? Do you see a situation that Israel will decide eventually to sit down with President Mahmoud Abbas, with his current government, with Hamas?
Hamas, we already sat with Mahmoud Abbas as the chair of the PA. It's not something new. The government resolution, by the way, that was accepted unanimously with Minister Livni and Lapid, who are on the left of the government, they voted in favor for a resolution that as long as in the Palestinian Authority, what I called it a terror government, because Hamas is part of it, the entire time of this operation, the Hamas is part of the Palestinian government. As long as this is happening, I don't see a situation that we can negotiate with Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen. If he does the right thing for his sake, not for the sake of Israel. As far as the Palestinian Authority and for logic and wisdom and seeing reality, and will get rid of this terror organization from his government, I don't see any problem to sit and talk to him. I think this is a condition. I keep saying it all the time. And even those 3 weeks, during these weeks, it's not inconceivable morally that this government is sitting together. He has to dismantle his government, and then I see no problem sitting down and negotiating.
But you know what is the problem? Is that the Palestinians are saying that during all the 9 months of the negotiation, Israel always said, what about the Gaza Strip? What about the Gaza Strip? What are you going to do with the Gaza Strip? And until President Mahmoud Abbas decides and says, okay, let's try to do this unity government. Let's try to, I want to be stronger in front of Hamas. Help me get stronger. The Israeli government comes and say, no. Now that you're trying to find a solution for the Gaza Strip and unite the Palestinian people who are in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, now we don't want to sit down and talk with you. So it's basically playing a double game, because from one side you're saying, okay, what about the Gaza Strip? You're not handling what is happening in Gaza. But when he starts handling what is happening in Gaza, Israel says, no, we're not playing this game anymore.
Look, I never use this argument personally. I think that what happened in the Gaza Strip, as far as the Palestinians, is a terrible tragedy, and I'll tell you why. In the summer of 2007, the same like this summer, somebody took control brutally, violently. I don't want to describe how it happened on the Gaza Strip, and actually occupied it and controlled it, took it from the PA was the Hamas, not Israel. We haven't been there for 2 years. It wasn't under occupation then, and it's not occupation today. Yeah, it is. Sorry, it is under the occupation of Hamas. It took it from the PA.
This you cannot deny.
Sure, the decision of the siege was the Olmert government, not ours. And it is correct, and it's just from the international law, because we saw that despite the siege, they managed to introduce all these weaponries to kill children. It wasn't done because of tourist cruises that came to the port. I would be happy to see that. I think that the innocent inhabitants deserve it, and there are inhabitants who are innocent, all of them. But the Palestinian Authority and the inhabitants of Gaza, and also the Israelis, everybody actually are part of this tragedy, which is the occupation of the Gaza Strip by the Hamas. I will have no opposition if the PA, headed by Abu Mazen, will take re-control of Gaza. It's less an Israeli matter, but it's more the Palestinian matter. But what happened was, it's not that the PA had an impact and brought the Hamas to be moderate. What happened was that since the establishment of the Palestinian terror government, the whole region deteriorated to violence. Tomorrow it's 30 days to the burial of the three abducted young people.
But Mr. Akunis, you know, who better than you knows that this is a process. Even Israel, let's remember, Fatah was not a peaceful organization. Fatah was also declared as a terror organization just a few years ago, 10, 20 years ago. Israel was not willing to sit down with Arafat and speak about and negotiate with him. And see how surprising is the world. Israel is sitting right now with Fatah, with President Mahmoud Abbas. It even sat down with Arafat, which was declared as a terrorist. So what is the difference? What is the difference between the terrorists from Fatah and the terrorists from Hamas?
Good question. I'll tell you my personal answer, not the position of the government. I think this was a real mistake to bring Arafat over. He came in July, by the way, like now, just 20 years ago, in July 94, Arafat came to Gaza from Tunisia, and as he entered the Gaza Strip, he violated the Oslo Accord when he himself smuggled weapons in his cars and his entourage into Gaza. And this was a basic mistake. That's what I thought, and Likud thought, that we should have in Judea, Samaria, and in the Gaza Strip local leadership that will be able to lead the Palestinians, and I think it's good for them as well. The fact that we made a mistake with Arafat doesn't mean we have to do it now with the Hamas. The Hamas calls upon the destruction of Israel. He wants an Islamic Sharia Islamic state. Even the liberals will not be able to live there, or the seculars. It's going to be a radical state. It's going to be like Tehran. It's going to be Iran. Not just in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, but whatever they call the Zionist settlement in Israel. There's no way that we are going to talk to Hamas at this situation. If altogether it changes his views, and this is not going to happen, and they become at least not Zionist. I don't expect them to be Zionist, but an organization that recognizes the existence of Israel, that's a new situation. But then Hamas will not be Hamas, and it has no right to exist. So that's a utopia, it's an illusion, and we shouldn't go there. We should strengthen the moderate forces in the Middle East, and there are moderate forces who are against this entire terrible phenomenon that's happening in Iraq, and in Jordan, and in Syria, and in Egypt. And they're struggling against it, you know, even more aggressive than we are doing it. This phenomenon of the attempt of the fundamentalistic Islam to take control of the Middle East and to change its entire nature. And I think that all of us in these very days have to unite and to struggle against this phenomenon in order to have this region to be flourishing, to bring tourists from all over the world, and can bring about a boom, not of rockets, but economic boom, a positive one for the benefit of all the inhabitants of this region.
We're finishing. These are not easy days for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He needs to face a lot of problems facing this operation and dealing with this operation. And he also has to deal with the United States, yes or no, let's say love affair, yes or no. But he's also dealing with inner problems inside his coalition, which makes his job even harder to deal with. How do you explain this lack of support inside the coalition with the Prime Minister, especially in these times?
Look, I think that first of all, the Prime Minister gets a great support from the Israeli public. We see it in every poll, his very considerate, very balanced steps. Even there's a criticism from the right that it's too moderate.
And what will happen after the war?
שאלה גדולה, מה יקרה אחרי המלחמה, כי sorry, because about behind the scenes, definitely it's going to be very, very forceful after the war. But that's exactly the difference. I think that when the IDF soldiers are struggling in the Gaza Strip in a very just operation, there's no point to start criticizing, definitely not political criticism. There'll be time for that. We'll discuss it. I'm sure I will discuss it with you in this very program.
Mr. Akunis, I believe that he will have another war to handle after this operation Thank you. Struggle, yes.
Yeah, a political struggle, of course.
Thank you very much for this interview. And 24 hours of a roller coaster. On Monday morning, it seems that the fighting in the Gaza Strip was dying down, but this proved an illusion, and the fighting, in fact, escalated. I-24 News reporter Ur Shapiro looks at the past 24 hours.
The dramatic chain of events continues in the Middle East and now hovers between the escalation in the fighting and a possible ceasefire. Day 21 of Operation Protective Edge had started with a bit of optimism as operations on the ground were slightly reduced, but the calm did not last long. Around 17:30 local time, a park near Shifa Hospital in Gaza City was targeted. At least 10 people died and dozens were injured. Hamas accused Israel of the strike. However, Israel denied this and instead said a misfiring Hamas rocket was responsible for the traumatic incident. A few minutes later, another blast occurred on the other side of the border as Hamas fired a mortar which killed 4 IDF soldiers in a military base near the Gaza border. By evening, it was clear to both sides a ceasefire would not be achieved, at least not in the short term.
I said, and I repeat, we must be prepared for a protracted campaign.
At around 2:30, the escalation affected top Hamas officials. According to reports, Israeli shelled the empty house of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. No one was hurt in the attack, but it was perhaps a clear message to Hamas and its leaders. In the meantime, the international criticism intensified as well. Iranian spiritual leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called on Muslims to arm the Palestinians and described the Israeli offensive as genocide.
We call on the world, and especially the Islamic world, to support and arm the Palestinian nation.
This may be the most dramatic picture of the day. Gaza's sole power plant was knocked out, cutting off most of the electricity in Gaza City and beyond. But in the middle of this chaos, a new chance for a ceasefire emerged.
We announce in the name of all parties our readiness to an immediate ceasefire and a humanitarian truce for 24 hours.
Latest developments only serve to illustrate how this conflict changed by the minute. On both sides of the divide, people are now asking, what next?
Welcome back, and right now I have the honor to have with me in the studio Mr. Gilad Sher, former Chief of Staff of Israel Prime Minister, CEO. Good evening, thank you very much, CEO of Blue White Future. Good evening, thank you very much for coming to our studio. Let's look at it from the history perspective. Do you think that if we're looking backwards, Israel is acting right now or remembered maybe to act a little bit too late?
It might be a little bit too late, but it shows a virtue of restraint and measured actions. There was no other choice but to act now. Question is, will it be sufficient in order to dismantle Hamas terrorist power and to disarm this huge arsenal over the ground and below the ground, in terms of their preparations for killing Israelis, kidnapping Jews, and just destroying the state of Israel, which they will not.
Mr. Sher, it's a totally different Hamas than the Hamas that you knew. What is the difference?
It's different because it's very, it narrows down to destroying the civil life and the sovereignty of Israel, and there's no other objectives here. Look what they're doing to their own population. This is really despicable, and hiding behind those human shields, those poor families under their houses, they dug those terror tunnels, those attack tunnels, exposing them to what happens now, regrettably.
You know, yesterday we sat down here and we heard a lot of views and ideas about how Hamas is working, and there was one view that Professor Uzi Rabi said, that maybe Israel's forgetting the political aspirations that Hamas has. Hamas is looking to be a legitimate player in the political arena. It's looking to be a legitimate player in the international community. And maybe they have pretty, let's say, a weird way to show it, but maybe this is their way to show the world that, okay, we're handling the Gaza Strip, we have our political wing, we have our military wing, and this is the way to handle this situation, and you need to recognize that we are some kind of a country like you.
Well, they can't have it both ways. There's a couple of prerequisites in order to become a legitimate partner or a legitimate actor in the political field. Number one is you don't do that throughout terrorism, hostilities, violence, and just firing rockets and missiles over 100 per day on civilians premeditatedly. You don't do that. What you do is you get your act together, you dismantle your military capacity, you incorporate it into the Palestinian formal police force, and you act in a way that the international community would accept as legitimate.
And it seems more than that. It seems that this time it's an unprecedented support that the international community is giving Israel.
And rightly so.
And until when? Until when will the international community continue to give this support to Israel? Because every day that passes and we see the images and the footage coming from the Gaza Strip, it's actually hurting Israel in its discussion and its reasons to this operation, and not helping.
I agree, because what you see on most of the screens, on television screens outside of this region, and in this region even, what you see is a very one-sided kind of picture. You don't see the other part, and we just had a talk just a couple of minutes before the show, before this program. There's depth to this conflict. It's broader than the perspective that people get from just the coverage and the footage that comes out of Gaza. And Israel, and you know that Israel sincerely, genuinely regrets every loss of life. Every loss of life, Israelis, Palestinians alike. The problem is that in order to do the job, there is inevitably some collateral casualties and some collateral damage. I don't know what the military clock, whether it would coincide with the political clock. I don't know that, but we have to be allowed to finish this elimination of the threat over 5 million people in Israel.
Every time that we're talking, and of course we are hearing from the Israeli side that Israel is sorry for the loss of innocent lives in the Gaza Strip. How do you convince the Palestinians that Israel is really sorry for the loss of innocent life? Because if you will talk with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, or if you will talk with the children who are right now sitting in the Gaza Strip and lost their homes, maybe the grown-ups know that Hamas is responsible for using them as human shields, but these kids that are waking up to a destroyed house, they cannot understand this, and you're creating another cycle of violence that you will not be able to get out of. So how do you actually try to convince the Palestinians that you are really sorry and you don't want to get into this war?
I think that there's a few points that I could make on that issue. The first one is just count the number of Palestinians currently treated in Israeli hospitals. Wounded Palestinians, we have nothing to do with them. Some of them are casualties from Hamas firing or failed rockets or whatever. Still we treat them. That's number one. Number two is, this is a big challenge, to persuade the the Palestinians that their suffering has another address, not Israel, to address their plight and their suffering.
Do you think that
and
Israel...
the third point, which is the most important one, is Israel has to do whatever it can to restore the negotiation process with the moderate Palestinians and little by little restore the PA in the Gaza Strip, first on the crossing points and then more substantively within the Gaza Strip, little by little, with the help of the Egyptians, with the help of the international community, not riding on Israeli tanks, of course, but I think that the key lies in continuing to pursue peace with the Palestinians towards a two-state reality, even if we do not reach a two-state solution yet, the final accord between Israelis and Palestinians, resolving all the core issues, but at least create a two-state reality throughout negotiations.
We hear all the time that the international community, the United States, the Western world don't understand the concept, don't understand the culture of the Middle East, don't understand how the Middle East works. Do Israel understand how the Middle East works?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of Israel. I can speak on behalf of myself only. And my personal perspective is that, all conflicts were created by human beings, and they should be resolved by human beings. And that's the way to resolve conflicts. We have to recap where we stopped last time, and even introduce a concept of partial agreements and understandings and gradual understandings that are layer over layer produce a more coherent, peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians.
Yes, Mr. Gilad Sher, thank you very, very much for giving us this interview. And we're going right now live to the Ministry of Defense in Tel Aviv, where our I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev is standing. Tal, so there was supposed to be a cabinet meeting tonight, but it was postponed to tomorrow morning. How come?
Well, yeah, good evening, Lucy. It was a very tense day with numerous reports of ceasefire progress, and the Israeli cabinet ministers were actually really waiting to come here to the Defense Ministry headquarters to a meeting that was scheduled to take place at 7 o'clock, and at about 7:30, word came out that the meeting was canceled and postponed till tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Prime Minister's office phoned up the ministers, and following all of these reports regarding ceasefire, they said, we're postponing the meeting till tomorrow, but there's no ceasefire agreement yet, and that is the message we're hearing tonight from Israeli officials. They clarified there's no ceasefire agreement yet. They do say that there is an outline and there's a joint effort to try and bring Hamas to accept the Egyptian outline or framework or arranging of the solution to this conflict, but we're not there yet. And as long as we're not there yet, Israel will continue the operation against the tunnels very forcefully. And maybe unfortunately for Netanyahu, postponing the cabinet meeting just opens a window for more political pressure that he's been facing in the past day. Growing political pressure, especially from his right-wing part of the political spectrum, calling on Netanyahu to continue the operation and reject the ceasefire efforts. And we heard the economy ministry, Naftali Bennett, leader of the Jewish Home, earlier today, say clearly that Netanyahu should reject the ceasefire and defeat Hamas. That is the goal of the operation. So another tense night for Netanyahu, and that's even before we started to talk about the international pressure that is mounting on Israel to announce an immediate ceasefire.
So, Tal, we know that everybody is telling Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to accept the ceasefire. Are there any voices that are telling him to accept the ceasefire and end this operation?
Well, there are definitely voices like that, but they're coming extremely from the outside of the Israeli borders. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry today was quoted, was on TV giving remarks on a Ukraine event, but he did address the Gaza conflict, and he says that Netanyahu himself asked for a ceasefire, but then in a very, we've grown used to Kerry bashing in the past few days. The Prime Minister's office actually issues a denial to this statement. They says Netanyahu did not ask for a humanitarian ceasefire. It was Kerry who asked it and proposed it, and Netanyahu told him that Israel will continue the operation until the tunnel is destructed. So there is pressure from the United States, but as we can see, the channels of communications and the lines of communications are apparently not working so well.
So they're not working so well, Tal, but what about the blaming game between Jerusalem and Washington for, yes, asking for a ceasefire, but no, we didn't ask? How this is accepted in Washington?
Well, since last night, we've been seeing an attempt from both Israeli and American officials to try and bring down the flames on that event. But it is clear that in Israel, even though some of the criticism directed to Kerry was coming mainly from Israeli media, but it was generated in the Israeli cabinet. But there is an attempt to bring down the flames. Yesterday, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, said that the criticism against Kerry was unwarranted, and U.S. officials expressed their dismay. There's an attempt to bring it down, but as we can see, even again tonight, Kerry falls again, announces something regarding Netanyahu, and a few minutes afterwards, Netanyahu says Netanyahu's office issues a totally different statement, and this is one of the problems with communications. Kerry says earlier tonight regarding Netanyahu, either somebody might be playing a totally different game, so Kerry might check. It seems like Netanyahu might be playing a totally different game.
Yes, Tal Shalev, our I-24 News diplomatic correspondent, thank you very much for this. And we're just getting reports about 6 soldiers who were hurt from a mortar shell hit. Of course, we will continue reporting about this late developments. And right now, joining me in the studio is Professor Galia Golan, head of the Diplomacy and Conflict Studies at the IDC Herzliya. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also Dr. Emily Landau, head of the Arms Control and Regional Security Program at the INSS. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Evening.
You know, I'm so happy that I have 2 women here with me in the studio, because maybe we can speak a little bit less with the bomb tone, but to speak a little bit about the diplomacy tone. And can it be solved right now when we are still reporting about soldiers being hit, when we just when people just buried their children just today and yesterday? Can diplomacy be an issue during an operation that it seems that it's not going to end anytime soon?
Well, I'm not sure that the issue that you mentioned is the reason why the 2 sides can't move to diplomacy right now. I think the first step, obviously, is a ceasefire, and that's what you've been discussing, and what Netanyahu is saying, and what Kerry is saying, and what other members of the government and cabinet are saying about this. It's going to end. I mean, the ceasefire is going to come sooner or later. That's clear. I think the issue right now, from Israel's point of view, is really the tunnel issue. In other words, Israel is saying that or is projecting that it would go for a ceasefire, but it can't go for a ceasefire where it can't continue to destroy the tunnels. In other words, that has to be part of any ceasefire, I think, that Israel is going to agree to at this point. I think that's pretty clear. IDF is in there. We know the huge threat that these tunnels pose to Israel, and that has to be part of it. Hamas, for now, is saying no. I heard earlier today, we heard from Mahmoud Abbas's representative their idea for a ceasefire, which was immediately rejected by Hamas. So they also have their conditions. Egypt is in it. It looks like, even though it looks like there's a big mess right now, I think actually it is moving towards the ceasefire. In other words, the sides are moving not in a smooth and easy way, but bumbling towards it, but I think it is moving in that direction. And I think Israel will insist that it continues to destroy the tunnels. With that, that Hamas will, it depends how much pressure is put on Hamas to agree to that.
Dr. Landau, we're always talking about the tunnels, and the tunnels are the main purpose. How come the tunnels
were not there before?
We're not there before.
Look,
How come Israel didn't know about the tunnels?
Israel knew about the tunnels, and we know that Israel knew about the tunnels. I think the only question that's really on the table is whether Israel knew the full extent of the tunnels. And here it seems that Israel didn't know the full extent of the tunnels. Even yesterday, the tunnel that came out near the kibbutz Nahal Oz, they're saying that they didn't know about that because each tunnel seems to have a number of exits on Israel's territory. And they seem not to have known about the extent of them.
In this
but
area
people lived there, and they were telling people about them. The IDF...
We're blamed that they're crazy, that they're hearing voices that they're not hearing.
The IDF, I think, knew about the tunnels. But, it's like very often there are issues like this in international relations. You know about something. I mean, even if you know that there's an offensive capability that's building up, you don't necessarily... What was Israel supposed to do? To initiate an operation to destroy the tunnels? The minute it became clear with the first instance of the 13 Hamas terrorists coming out and from the tunnel and doing what they almost did, then it became something that, okay, we have to take care of this. But even if you know about that, Israel knew about the rockets, obviously. Israel knows about Hezbollah's rockets, right? We know that the rockets now in Hezbollah are, I think, 3 times what they were before the Second Lebanon War. So what do you do with that information? Do you start a war with Hezbollah? No, you know that offensive capability is there. But until you hope that your deterrence will work and that Hezbollah won't start anything, which has worked up until now. And if something starts, you'll have to deal with that. So knowing about an offensive capability doesn't mean that you're going to initiate something to deal with it.
Yeah, but rockets were fired towards Israel for the last 14 years.
Right,
so
but
Israel
they learned
could retaliate and could act only
that's
by
it. So
Israel
did react to what to the attacks that were coming, and all the focus was on the rockets because the rockets were being fired. That's exactly it.
We're talking about a lot about diplomacy, and is diplomacy the key for any solution right now? Israel's always saying that it will not sit with Hamas, it will not sit with a terror organization. Should Israel continue saying that? Maybe because, I'm going to be really cliche right now, but
can't choose your enemies.
Yes, if you want to do peace, you do it with your enemies, not with your friends.
I think that's going to be a very serious problem. I just wanted to say one thing. We've clearly the way in which most wars end these days is, of course, through diplomacy, and I think what we're seeing is very, very typical. Where certainly in our wars, where now we have a situation where we want to cease fire, but we don't want it too quickly. We have to, the feeling is, the sense is, the government has said, the army has said, we've got to deal with the tunnels. And so I think we've got 2 things going on here, really a rush to deal with the tunnels before there's a ceasefire. The ceasefire is going to take time, in any case, first to get terms for a ceasefire, because there's no agreement yet between Hamas and Israel on this, nor with the Egyptians. So it'll take time to get it, and then we can stretch it out a little bit more to achieve whatever can be achieved. I must say, though, my feeling has been, and very much from the beginning of all of this, is that we're in a war situation. We're fighting the war. We could indeed argue over there should have been or shouldn't be a ground attack. But from the very beginning, my only sense of this has been that nothing really will be achieved, and we will have this continuous cycle over and over unless we get back to really what is the core of this thing. And the core of this is the conflict between us and the Palestinians. And the only way that's going to be resolved is clearly through diplomacy. There's no such thing, or it's very rare to have a decisive battle against guerrilla troops or whatever we want to call them, and certainly terrorists. It rarely happens. There are cases, but it's very, very rare. It's going to end only at some point with the through diplomacy, through negotiation. And here you raised a question that I think is very important. We certainly don't like Hamas, and Hamas certainly doesn't recognize Israel, is not willing to negotiate, all of these things. On the other hand, I do think there have been opportunities where we might have been able to deal with Abu Mazen, bearing in mind that there is also Hamas. In other words, I'm not entirely sure that we can ignore them or that we could have ignored them. We had, I think, an opportunity when Hamas was quite weak as a result of developments within the region, Syria, Egypt, and so forth. And so it went into this unity government, this reconciliation agreement, because it was weak. And the same way that I think Rabin, back in the 90s, chose to work with the PLO for various reasons. But one of them was that PLO had been seriously weakened, losing the Soviet Union, the Iraq War, having supported Saddam Hussein. And that was one of the considerations is, okay, this is a time to deal with them, if you're going to deal with them at all. Not that he was crazy about dealing with them. And I think that in this sense, we had this opportunity. I think it was a mistake to reject the unity government, because the unity government, at least they said, doesn't mean they necessarily would have done it, but what they said is that it would be under Abu Mazen and Abu Mazen's conditions, which were the three conditions that Israel and the quartet had said: recognition of Israel, dealing with Israel, and so forth. Whether or not it would have happened that way remained to be seen. I think it was a mistake to ignore that or to reject it. But then I have to go to the bottom line. If we have a government that is willing to reach a peace agreement, and we know pretty much what a peace agreement is going to look like, there are concessions are going to have to be made. Do we have a government that's willing to do it? I don't think that the present coalition was willing to do it, and therefore they had no reason to accept even this kind of a Hamas involvement.
We'll just continue to talk a little bit more about this issue. I just want to go right now live to our I-24 News correspondent, Eli Ochenberg, who's standing right now in Israel-Gaza border. Can I say, Eli, a relatively quiet night?
Well, Lucy, I wouldn't say it's a quiet night, because as the ceasefire situation remains very unclear, the operation inside the Gaza Strip continues with full power. As we can see constantly all throughout the day, the IDF activity inside the Gaza Strip, as it still aims at exposing as many underground tunnels as possible, as many ammunition storages, and of course attacking terror sites. And according to the last official update of the IDF, that was a few hours ago, since midnight, the IDF attacked 110 terror sites, and we're still counting. And we can also see the salvo of rockets being fired towards Israel from here, right behind me, from the Gaza Strip. And as the Hamas main focus at the moment is using the underground infrastructure that is left via infiltrating Israel, yet another infiltration attempt was foiled this afternoon, as the Givati Brigade forces identified 5 Hamas militants emerging from a tunnel shaft. They killed the 5 militants, but as you remember, Lucy, the infiltration attempt yesterday ended fatally with 5 Israeli soldiers killed. So the forces alongside the border are on very high alert out of the fear of more infiltration attempts. And the IDF is, of course, waiting to hear a concrete decision whether this operation will deepen or will be ended. And of course, it will affect the long-term strategy. But at the moment, the IDF forces continue their activity both inside the Gaza Strip and along the border, and will, of course, keep you updated with any development from here, Lucy.
Yes, Eli Ochenberg, thank you very much for this. This is day 22. How much can we say that the infrastructure of Hamas is actually hurt?
Oh, I think a lot of damage has been done to the Hamas infrastructure. I think IDF has had a lot of achievements in that regard. There's different, reports coming from Gaza all the time. There are those that are claiming that Hamas is close to being entirely fed up with this and would like to end it. Islamic Jihad, I think the reports are that they would have ended it already almost 2 weeks ago. And Hamas, whether it's DEF leading this and Mashal and all of that dynamic. And then there are others that say, no, they want to continue on. The damage done to the infrastructure, I think, is going to be a very important part of whatever ceasefire is achieved and whatever longer-term arrangement is going to be achieved. Because Hamas is, they're leading this state. I don't know what to call them. It's a government, but it is also a terrorist organization. And we've seen throughout this operation, really, that they have no scruples. There's no values that come anywhere near the rules of the game that are used in international relations, right? We hear always about the proportionate response. Well, that's good if you're talking about two states. But when you're talking about a state versus a terrorist organization that has no qualms about doing all of the horrific things that we've been hearing about that Hamas does, you're dealing with a very different actor
exactly
here.
From that point, because we're always asking how long can Israel continue with this operation, but how long can Hamas continue with this operation? Because
Well, this is the question, but I think what's going to happen is that there are going to have to be international actors that, start becoming more prominent in this dynamic. And we're seeing already, Israel was very unhappy about the fact that Kerry seemed to be, and I'm leaving aside all the arguments whether he did or whether he didn't, but it seemed to be, especially the meeting in Paris, it seemed to be that he was moving more towards Turkey and Qatar, which obviously is a no-go for Israel. Turkey, because Erdogan is spewing anti-Semitic rants over the past 2 weeks that make him a totally unacceptable party around the table in this dynamic. Qatar for the support of Hamas, and Egypt was outside. Now it seems that it's very clear that Egypt will be a central player, and it's sort of moving in that direction. And that's why I said things I think are moving in that direction, keeping Egypt very much in the center of this picture. We know what Egypt thinks about Hamas. They will be putting pressure on Hamas, having Abbas also be part of this. These are the actors that at the end of the day are going to have to carve out something, but there's going to have to be a lot of pressure on Hamas. It's not just going to be that Hamas, will surrender because of what Israel's done. It will have to be Hamas coming under the control of a number of international actors that will get the message across to Hamas that this is not going to fly anymore.
You mentioned a few international actors, and now I just want you to see with me in this very complex region, some of the greatest public enemies are also friends behind the scenes. Daniel Campus takes a look at the political relationship in this current conflict.
It is a form of common knowledge in the Middle East that Riyadh and Jerusalem have an under-the-table relationship based on shared interests. The most important of those is protection against a common enemy, the Shiite threat and rising Sunni extremism. The Arab world is currently being flooded with images from the conflict in Gaza as the number of fatalities on the Palestinian side rises. On Sunday, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas met with Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. The meeting took place in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, at the Royal Palace. During the meeting, the two leaders discussed the current situation in the Gaza Strip. The meeting took place days after Turkey and Qatar encouraged Hamas to reject the Egyptian ceasefire, one fully embraced by the Palestinian Authority. Qatar's support for the ousted Muslim Brotherhood collides with Saudi Arabia's open support of the current Egyptian regime of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Now the rise of Shiite axis is threatening the kingdom and its Sunni allies. After 1,300 years of Muslim history dominated by the Sunnis, it is a tug-of-war with the strengthening Shiite axis of Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the Shiite tribes of Yemen supported by Iran. Iran's current nuclear program also has the Saudi kingdom worried, but the Saudis are well aware of the political, social, and economic stability of Israel compared to the ongoing riots in many countries in the Arab world. Israel has impressive technological capabilities to fight terrorism, including the now famous Iron Dome system. technologies which the kingdom may need in the near future as the north is threatened by ISIS and other extremist groups. Everything is behind the scenes, nothing is public, but the security cooperation with Egypt and the Gulf states is unique and has been described by many Israeli generals and security analysts as the best period of security and diplomatic relations with the Arab world.
Let's talk a little bit about Qatar and Saudi Arabia and this, let's say, entire new
alphabet soup.
Yes, Israel's talking about Qatar now being the new enemy, and Qatar is giving money to the tunnels and giving money to all the terror that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. Qatar is saying from inside, well, we gave money to build schools and build cultural centers and build hospitals. We didn't know that they're doing this. You should ask yourselves, how come they did this? And on the other side, you find the United States in an arms deal with Qatar. You see Saudi Arabia trying to end this with Israel, and you see Iran. And on the other side, you see Egypt standing in front of the Palestinians and Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas and basically telling them enough is enough. We're not supporting anyone. We're, in a way, supporting Israel.
No, you also have to add, by the way, American interests in Qatar with regard to Syria, for example. There are even more angles to this thing. I think there are a few key things. First of all, I wanted to say in response to the Hamas that they have been dealt a blow militarily, undoubtedly, but I think they've been strengthened politically, because I think the most serious thing now is that this round of fighting has definitely strengthened Hamas politically within the Palestinian community, and more seriously, more critically, it has weakened Abu Mazen. Abu Mazen can't even show his face in certain parts of the West Bank today. And so where we could use this as an opportunity to reassert Abu Mazen's control, Fatah control in Gaza, but that's not going to be an easy matter. Certainly what helps here is Egypt, and Egypt is key. In my opinion, the United States and Egypt outweigh all of the others. If it's Qatar, if it's Saudi Arabia, if it's Turkey.
You see that the Palestinian delegation from the West Bank is trying to get is actually in Egypt right now and trying to get to a certain ceasefire. But the Hamas leaders are saying, whoa, you're not going to say and take control about anything that is happening in the Gaza Strip.
But this is exactly the point. They are now in a position to seriously challenge Abu Mazen, and they're not likely to just let it go by and let Abu Mazen be the chief negotiator. And that's really the issue. And I think we mentioned that earlier, that this is an internal Palestinian issue. It has tremendous ramifications. Now, I believe that Egypt is very, very powerful. And I think we saw this in the reaction of the Arab League, which is really still under, or once again under, Egypt. And that's been positive from the Israeli point of view. That is to say, certainly negative with regard to Hamas.
Have this big ally next to Israel back again.
And I think that I think that Egypt will remain key in all of this, with all of these other things going on. And the most important thing for us, I think, is that Egypt is behind Abu Mazen. And
I think there's a broader regional dynamic that's going on. I mean, it's us and the Palestinians and what we need to reach, but the lines are changing in the Middle East, more broadly speaking, although Qatar, as you say, on the one hand, the United States doing this arms deal, on the other hand, the other dynamics. But broadly speaking, I mean, right now, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia sort of together with Israel, and maybe Abbas, I don't know to what degree, are going to be pushing in one direction, and the others, and with Iran on the sidelines. Iran, I just saw a report that they have been in constant contact with Hamas. Now, this is a new development because obviously relations had almost ended between Iran and Hamas, and now suddenly, and these things do change, but Iran is just taking the opportunity to
I want
to continue to get into the
Yes.
act and to continue.
You know how we call it? You know how we call it in Israel? It's a big balagan. It's a big mess.
Oh, definitely.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you
You're
very
very
much for this. We're
welcome.
going out for a small break.
אנחנו צריכים להיות ערוכים למערכה ממושכת. אנחנו נמשיך לפעול בתקיפות ובשיקול דעת עד השלמת משימתנו.
هدنة إنسانية لمدة 24 ساعة.
What Hamas have been doing throughout the day, which they supposedly declared a ceasefire, they were taking all of the preparations in order to carry out further attacks against the state of Israel and against its civilians.
Welcome back to this special edition of the news. Today, of course, we continue our coverage of the extended Operation Protective Edge, and we are just reporting about sirens being heard in Jerusalem and also in the Jerusalem area and also in Beersheba. And right now, I'm joined, and I have the honor to have in the studio Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and Abba Evan, chair in the International Diplomacy IDC. Good evening. Thank you very much for
Lucy.
coming. How can we solve it?
How can we solve it? I think Israel needs some more time. I think Israel needs more time to not just identify and eliminate the tunnels that are going under the border that have continued to exact a very bloody price from Israel, but more time to put more pressure on Hamas. Hamas is not going to give up so easily. It's not going to certainly give up its rockets easily. And it's only if Israel is given time and space to do this and sort of diplomatic cover, then a solution can be found that I think would be beneficial not just for Israel, but for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and even the Palestinians in the West Bank as well.
How much? How much time?
Well, you get different estimates from military people. Some people think, I just heard recently, talking to some senior commanders, that they need something like more than a week to deal with all the tunnels. But I think there's a direct correlation between the amount of military pressure that's put on Hamas and Hamas's willingness to agree to a ceasefire, which will result in opening the border crossings, an easing of Israel's maritime blockades, opening of the border crossings between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, which would be for the benefit of the civilian population. The civilian population also can get international aid. The idea is not to return to the status quo that existed in November 2012. Those agreements enabled Hamas to use the ceasefire as sort of a cover to build up rockets, longer-range rockets, and then fire them when it suited Hamas. And so the damage becomes even greater every round.
What did Israel miss, Dr. Oren, during all these years? What did it miss?
Well, it didn't understand the extent of the tunnel digging, for starters. And that's not new. In 2008-2009, there was an estimate that there were 200 Hamas tunnels under the Philadelphia route between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. It turned out there were 1,000 tunnels. Hamas is much more adept at tunnel building than Israel's wildest and worst expectations. I think
didn't see it coming with all the money that was pouring in the Gaza Strip, with knowing that Qatar is supporting, that Hezbollah is supporting, that Iran is supporting. Israel didn't know that this is going to make Hamas stronger and stronger and make the infrastructure of Hamas more, let's say, yes, more, even stronger than it is right
now.
Yeah.
I was in Washington during these years, and Israel was under a very significant pressure to ease up on the blockade. And one of the issues that was most controversial was cement. cement and reinforced concrete. And the Obama administration, not only the Obama administration, elements in Congress and the international community put pressure on Israel, saying, listen, there's been a lot of damage in Gaza from the 2000, 2008, 2009 cast-lead operation. Tens of thousands of houses have been damaged. Let's let in the concrete. Let's let in the reinforced steel so that the Palestinians can rebuild. And Israel's response was, we fear that Hamas is going to take this stuff and use it to build underground bunkers and tunnels. And eventually Israel was put under so much pressure that Israel relented, and we arranged to have the cement and steel passed to a responsible UN agency, and you see where it ended up.
You know, last time that we met, we spoke about the, let's say, weird relationship between Israel and the United States.
Is it weird?
The weird, the
weird in a positive way too. Yes.
Weird in a positive way, we can call it. Can we call it positive?
Oh, sure, you can call it positive. Even when it's bad, it's good. Let me put it that way. Okay, why is it good? Listen, I could give you the statistic: 75% of American people support Israel. The Congress has been voting almost unanimously to support Israel.
When you're hearing Secretary of State John Kerry is saying something, and the Israelis are denying it, and you're hearing Barack Obama telling Benjamin Netanyahu, stop doing this.
What does that sound like? What does it sound like to you, Lucy?
You cannot tell me to stop it.
Doesn't it sound like an old married couple?
It is. It's definitely an old married couple.
But they stay married. That's the thing. There's no divorces here. No one's talking about divorcing. It is very much like an old married couple, especially tonight when John Kerry came out and said that Netanyahu called me and asked me for a ceasefire, and this is being interpreted by the Israeli
president. Can I say kindergarten? Can I say kindergarten?
Or an old married couple. It is. And listen, the Israeli government represents a pretty large swath of the Israeli public. Tonight, there's something that almost never happens in Israeli history. There's close to a consensus in supporting the government and what it's doing. The Obama administration has a certain worldview. That worldview has always put a premium on finding peace between Israel and the Palestinians. It's one of what I call their gut issues. It's very empathetic to Palestinian suffering, very sensitive to the hard pictures that are coming out of Gaza. They say it in almost every statement they make. Tonight, the White House made a statement which is very critical of Israel. It said that, according to published reports, Israel is not doing enough to limit Palestinian casualties in Gaza. That's very insulting to Israel because Israelis think they're doing everything and taking great risks to limit Palestinian casualties. But that is the worldview of this administration, and you got to live with it. And this is the decision made by the people of the United States, as the decision of the people of Israel has been to elect a democratically elected, that's a blame of the term, government. They have to get along. And that is the marriage.
Israel say the Americans don't understand it?
They can say it's not the first time in history, believe me. 1948, 67, many times Israelis have gone to the Americans and said, listen, you don't understand this. Americans have said, let's go to negotiations. Israelis have said, no, we've got to defend ourselves. My own experience, looking back over history, is that the more we stand up for what is absolutely crucial for Israel, the more we actually get respect from the United States. It's a kind of, maybe it's like a marriage too.
Yes.
Maybe it's like a marriage too. And you have to say, on one hand, thank you for everything you do for us, thank you for Iron Dome, thank you for the support in the Security Council, but also sometimes you say no thank you. And that is, here, Israel feels it has to continue fighting on the ground in order to achieve something like what will be interpreted by Hamas as a defeat.
Is Israel looking for answers or explanations about the arms deal with Qatar that the United States have?
We have a long-standing policy where we don't oppose American arms sales to the Gulf area, not just in the Gulf area, but under an historic commitment of the United States known as Qualitative Military Edge, QME, three of the most important letters in the U.S.'s relationship. The United States has undertaken to ensure that Israel can defend itself against any regional enemy or any combination of regional enemies, and they certainly factor in the arms sales to some of our neighbors who may not be so friendly in the future.
How does it work?
What, QME?
How does it
Can't go
work?
Into it all.
Because in one way, you're a big supporter of Israel. In one way, you are saying that you're the biggest friend that Israel has. But on the other side,
even-handed mediator, and the other hand, you're selling arms to the Arabs.
You're selling arms to not, we can say, the best friend or an ally of Israel.
Well, the explanation you'll often get from the United States is that better our arms than somebody else's arms. and at least you know what you're dealing with. And they'll also say that we'll find a way of counterbalancing this, and that's an historic undertaking. I know of nothing like it in the history of bilateral relations, where one country has assured that another country that it will always be able to defend itself against any combination of adversaries. It's amazing, and it works. QME works.
Do you think that, of course, one of the key points that everybody is talking about is making President Mahmoud Abbas stronger in order for him to be a legitimate player and to actually get back to the negotiation table with him? And for Mahmoud Abbas, right now, seeing Hamas, he needs Hamas, according to him, to be able to unite the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. Should Israel continue to insist not talking with Mahmoud Abbas as long as he is in the same government with Hamas?
First of all, I think Israel has an interest in strengthening Mahmoud Abbas. I do. I think it. I think there are ways
of
doing it.
Because it seems that they're doing everything that they can to make him weaker, because he is weak right now.
Well, I'm not the
No,
I'm not the spokesman for the government, but it's what I feel. And when I feel as a citizen, I think it's an opportunity. It would be nice if Mahmoud Abbas was not accusing us of war crimes in various international courts. It would make it a lot easier to strengthen him. But here's an opportunity. The Palestinian Authority has many hundreds of U.S. and Canadian trained security forces, really very disciplined, good security forces that can be deployed at the hopefully one day reopen crossings between Israel and Gaza, between Egypt and Gaza. They can be deployed along the very porous Philadelphia route between the Egyptian border and the Gaza border. There can be a strong role. If I had my way, I would be using Palestinian Authority security forces to demilitarize the Gaza Strip, taking out the rockets from the stockpiles under some type of international umbrella. That would be ideal if that could happen. And then Hamas without rockets is not the same Hamas anymore, basically. But it would be important still that Israel adheres to the three conditions established by the quartet. That is, the Palestinian government has to recognize Israel, has to disavow terror, has to accept previous agreements between the Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel, and then we can move forward. But a Hamas that's not killing Israelis and not plotting to kill Israelis and not arming itself to kill Israelis is a different Hamas.
One last question. Can Israel finish this operation and maybe get to a ceasefire without agreeing to finish the siege on the Gaza Strip?
The siege meaning the blockade?
Yeah,
the blockade's really important. Blockade, remember, just about everything else goes in. It's not as if the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are being denied food because of the blockade. The blockade hurts Hamas because Hamas was operating through the tunnels and getting a lot of money, charging like a customs duty of things coming through the tunnels. And the Egyptians closed off the tunnels. The issue is not much more with Egypt than it is with Israel. Again, under strong pressure from the United States, the crossings between Israel and Egypt were open, and custom booths were set up by Hamas. They took customs of everything that went through the border. So either whether it was going underground or over the border, Hamas was getting rich for it.
Of course.
And so the siege, I think, is overstated. The siege can be lifted if you're sure that everything that goes in there is not being used for military purposes. And the big problem is that there's a lot of dual-use stuff out there, like aluminum. Okay, irrigation pipes, wonderful in irrigation pipes. The irrigation becomes a rocket that falls on this studio in Jaffa. That's what an irrigation pipe comes. So you got to look at the irrigation pipes. Nitrates that are used for fertilizing fields becomes the stuff that shoots up the irrigation pipe that falls on Jaffa. So it's not so simple, but I think it can be done. I think ultimately it has to be done. I think certainly the people of Gaza deserve it, and Israel has no interest whatsoever in seeing them suffer, and actually has an interest in having a prosperous, peaceful, satisfied Palestinian population in Gaza.
Only from all the people who came today to the studio, if only someone in the government if someone in the government is hearing this, maybe we could end this operation sooner
I can speak
than
louder.
later. Please do so.
I can speak louder. I think there are
so.
people out there who understand this, and Israel has no interest in having a hostile Gaza that can threaten us in this way.
Dr. Michael Oren, please speak louder, and thank you very much for giving us this interview. And the kibbutz of right now, not the kibbutz, but with me from Beersheba is our I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari. Shai, we just reported about sirens in Beersheba. What is the recent situation, the recent over there?
Yeah, Lucy, basically a few minutes ago we had 2 air raid sirens go off more or less back to back. And we're talking about a very major barrage fired in the general direction of Beersheba and surrounding communities. Apparently 9 rockets, 4 of them intercepted around the city and 5 of them falling in open areas. There are no reports so far of damage or injuries in this case. I can tell you, we've experienced a lot of air raid sirens and color red alerts in communities closer to Gaza, where it is, for lack of a better word, I'd say even a casual experience. Here in Beersheba, the attitude is less casual still, even weeks into this conflict. And basically, when you experience an air raid siren here in Beersheba, you have no choice in the matter. You are ushered by emergency personnel here on staff into the shelter behind me inside the hospital. Media really don't have any option to stay on the scene, as is sometimes the case in other places. Basically, we got a different experience tonight. I think you may be able to show those images shortly.
Yes, Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very, very much for this. And now to the kibbutz. The kibbutz of Nir Am is located close to the Israeli border with the Gaza Strip. For the population of the kibbutz, life has changed in the last 3 weeks since Operation Protective Edge began and Hamas militants started to use the tunnels to try and infiltrate the kibbutz. I-24 News correspondent Michal Divon was there.
In the small kibbutz of Nir Am, overlooking the Gaza Strip, not many civilians can be seen these past 2 weeks. The pastoral neighborhood where Dana Bar-On lives has become a military zone, like many other towns along the Israel-Gaza border. Dana has been living in Nir Am for the past 17 years and describes how her utopia changed overnight.
I don't remember the first Qassam falling. A few days ago, I asked my friends, I said to them, do you remember when it started? Because I don't remember times where there weren't bombs in the kibbutz, and no one really remembers, because 14 years feels like a lifetime. I know we used to go to the dining room and stuff when I was still in school, so I remember a time without them, but it seems really far away. It's become part of our lives.
Many citizens have overcome their initial fears. However, today, rockets are not the only threat. Just yesterday, an attempted infiltration by Hamas terrorists was halted outside the Nahal Oz community, killing 5 IDF soldiers and preventing what could have been a civilian massacre. Outside of Nir Am, a similar attempt was also stopped previously.
The fear of the Qassam bombs, it's there, but it's, we're used to it. And now I was sitting on the bench and I kept looking behind me to see if someone's coming. Suddenly they can be right next to you without you even knowing that it's coming. And it's a new threat. It's a very, very scary one, because if I want to keep safe from the Qassam bombs, I'll run to the shelter. If I want to keep safe from a Hamas terrorist, I need a gun or something, which I don't have.
Despite the imminent terror threat Israelis are dealing with, Dana feels the citizens of Gaza are suffering just as much.
I think the citizens of Gaza are not responsible at all. I think the Hamas is terrorizing them as much as they terrorize us.
While the IDF has uncovered a vast network of at least 32 tunnels leading from the Strip into Israel, it is impossible to know how many more exist. At the end of Operation Protective Edge, southern residents will have to live not only with the idea of rockets fired into their communities, but also at the knowledge that a tunnel could be dug at any time underneath their homes.
Yes, and right now joining me in the studio, Professor Daniel Friedman, former Israeli Minister of Justice. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming to the studio.
Good evening.
And also Ruth Aglish, I'm saying the name right? Washington Post correspondent, Israel and the Palestinian territories. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. We reporters, we journalists love to look at the day after. And the day after, there will be a lot of investigations and a lot of committees and a lot of reports and a lot of blamings from a lot of sides. Should Israel be the one to blame about what is right now going on?
Well, it's pretty certain that the UN Council for Human Rights is trying or will be trying to blame Israel. It has already tried to do so, and it decided to set up a committee similar to the Goldstone Commission. But on this matter, let me just remind that the Goldstone report, although it caused damage to Israel, there is no doubt about it, but it was such an aberration. It was so biased and that it completely lost credibility. And in fact, I would say that one of the victims of this report was Mr. Goldstone himself, because his reputation was really destroyed. And let's think what happened afterwards. There were no proceedings against any Israelis. There were some attempts to do so, but eventually I think some countries realized that the thing went too far, and England actually changed its laws. They used to have a law that dealt with so-called universal jurisdiction. In addition, and they still have it, but in addition, they had the possibility of every private person or organization bringing a private claim. Now, this has been changed, I think, to some extent at least, due to the efforts of our ambassador, Ron Posar, and the law has been changed. So the situation in England and also in Spain is now much, much better. And let me also remind what happened with the Marmara boat, the Turkish boat that tried to go to Gaza, and it was stopped on the way. And on this boat, as you know, Israel stopped it. There were actually 9 citizens, Turkish citizens, who were killed, and a few Israeli soldiers were injured. Now, what was the result of this? Israel set a commission to explore this matter. It was headed by former Justice Turkel, who is, I think, a very reasonable and balanced judge. And eventually they came to the conclusion that Israel has a right to impose a siege, a naval siege on Gaza, and actually that the Israeli forces were acted in order. This was not the end of the matter, because afterwards the Secretary of the UN also set a commission headed by one objective person, one representative of Israel, which was Advocate Yossi Chechanover, and one representative from Turkey. Now, this commission also, they endorsed the Turkel report. They decided that Israel was actually in the right, that there was no breach of international law. So this was the result, despite the fact that 9 Turkish citizens, unfortunately, died in this incident.
So when we're looking at, let's say, the legal terms, it seems that Israel has the right to protect itself. Israel has the right to protect its citizens, but let's say that the international community, the public opinion, all around the world, from the West to the United States, think differently in a lot of cases, and sometimes they think differently because they don't see the entire picture. When you are reporting, and you are actually reporting from Israel and from the Palestinian territories, do you see this lack of information going to people who read, people who see, to the viewers on the international media?
I mean, that's a difficult question, because I think every media is different, and there's such a wide range of different media. I mean, you're talking today, you have bloggers who are blogging from a certain perspective. You have television, which maybe shows one image and not another image, and you have print media that maybe focuses on a certain topic, and you have to get it all into like 600 words and column inches.
And of course, you have the horrible images that are coming from the Gaza Strip and the horrible reality that they are living.
Well, this is the truth. I mean, if you're talking about what's going to happen the day after, I can tell you what's happening right now. now. I mean, the challenge has been for us at the Washington Post is to really try and be as balanced as we can when we have a reporter in Gaza who is seeing these, terrible killings every day, children being killed, families being wiped out, and he's sending stories that are reflecting that are writing in really depth about what's going on there. And from here, the perspective is very militaristic and very, comes from the army and what the army is doing. Although we have been out into the field and interviewed residents of southern Israel that have been living under rocket fire for a long time, the people that we saw earlier on the kibbutzim who are very scared and nervous about having tunnels pop up inside. So we have been trying to be balanced, but it's a different story in both places.
It's a totally different story, Professor Friedman, and more than that. Israel is a country, is a developed country. Israel has its army, Israel has its shelters, has its education system, has social workers. Israel can't protect itself. This entity, the Gaza Strip.
Protection is only very partial. The damage and the losses in Israel are enormous. Although we don't have many hundreds, if you want to speak, of people being killed, but the damage is incredible. I mean, 5 million people are under threat.
Here, the world is seeing,
sirens.
Like we just heard, the world is seeing that families are being wiped away. Families, houses are being destroyed. People are describing the smell in the streets of the Gaza Strip. So, how can you compete with that? How can because we're talking with people, we're not talking with robots, and they are seeing the images that are coming.
There's no question that this is the way it is reflected in the media. After all, we have to compare it as to what happened in other wars recently. I mean, there was a war in Yugoslavia, and NATO bombed Yugoslavia in the Kosovo War. There were about 2,000 civilians killed, and I don't think even one of NATO's soldiers were killed in this war, or maybe 2 pilots that had a crash of their plane. That's all. Over 2,000 were killed. In this, we find it's some kind of, I don't know what brings it about, and there can be, you can get any guess why the focus on Israel is so strong, even not in comparison to what the Hamas does, because they are really criminals. They are war criminals, and they admit it. They admit it openly. They are proud of it. They say, we are trying to shell the Israeli citizens. We are war criminals. That's our profession.
How come
that's
the
what we do.
focus really on Israel is so strong? How come? Because people are being murdered and slaughtered in Syria each and every day. We're talking about 1,800 people in 3 days. How come when something happens in Israel and in this region, in the Gaza Strip, the whole world just comes out and starts yelling massacre?
This is a question that has been going through my mind very often recently. And I think that you raise a very important point. I know in my paper we have been covering the wars in Syria, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But there is a lot of interest in what Israel does, especially in America, where there's big lobbies for Israel. The big Jewish lobby is very, very powerful and very strong. They're very interested to know what's going on here. People in Washington who read our paper are very interested to know what Israel is doing, and maybe it's an issue of access as well. I mean, journalists here can go inside Gaza, they can see what's going on. It's not so easy to go inside Syria and to report from there. It's not so easy to go into Iraq either. So I know it's an issue of maybe people just being very, very interested in Israel and what the Jewish state does, and also being and journalists not having as greater access to the other places that you mentioned in the Middle East.
Yes, before we continue this, I just want to go to Ashkelon, where our I-24 News correspondent Shachar Peled is standing by the Barzilai Hospital, where some injuries, people who were injured are coming to the hospital. Shachar?
Yes, Lucy, we're now in Barzilai Hospital here in the southern city of Ashkelon. We learned that there's a siren right now, so we have to go to a secure
Shachal, go
structure.
to a secure place, and of course we will get back to you as soon as this is. We love to call it the TV in its best moment when we are talking with a reporter and he needs to cope with a siren. But really, Professor Friedman, maybe this, you mentioned the Jewish lobby and that protects Israel. Maybe sometimes this Jewish lobby is doing more damage than it's helping Israel?
That's very hard for me to say, but the fact is that we have this, I'd say, propaganda against Israel, not in the United States, it's mainly in Europe and in other countries. We find it mainly there. And it's not that you cannot bring media to see what happens in Syria. After all, you have even if it's difficult to get into Syria, you have so many millions of refugees from Syria who stay in Jordan, in Lebanon. You can show it, and very little. I mean, it seems as if the world is fed up with what happened with Syria, and they're never fed up with what happens in Israel. They're always interested in it. But let me add another point, which I think is political and it is important. I think that the situation of Israel, the international law and all this is very strongly is very political, and politics has great bearing on the law. And I think that if the position of Israel would have been a little bit better, it would have also legal aspects.
Better in what way?
Better in a way that that Israel can show that it make the greatest effort to reach peace with those with whom we can reach peace, maybe with the Palestinian Authority. If we would have made greater effort to reach some kind of, if not agreement, accommodation, better on the West Bank, I think it would affect the situation in general, because the atmosphere against Israel was I think, not very favorable when all this started. There was a feeling, I think to some extent coming from the United States, that Israel did not do its best with regard to the peace agreement or to coming to agreement on the regarding the West Bank. And when this is the situation, that you get the impression that Israel did not do its best when it could, or in matters that it still can, then it does affect the way the media treats us in Gaza. And I think now, the day after, when you ask, I think we should make every effort to reach an agreement on the West Bank, and if possible, to limit the settlements and to make the life of the Palestinian living on the West Bank as good as we can.
If we're looking at the international community and we're looking at this, let's say in this current operation, and we already asked this, but this unprecedented, in one way or another, support that Israel has in the last, in this operation, unlike other operations, what have changed?
In Israel?
Yes, what have changed? What have changed in this operation that didn't happen in other operations?
I mean, from what I can see from talking to the people who I've interviewed in the South, and from going around as much as possible and talking to Israelis, that it's the issue of feeling under threat. And I think Mr. Freeman mentioned that already, that there's millions of Israelis who feel their lives are under threat. Even today, I interviewed Isaac Herzog, the opposition leader, and he said the same thing. When he found himself sitting in a bomb shelter like he did as a child in 1967, yes. And he feels under threat.
I'm just right now joined by Avi Melamed, the senior Middle East analyst. Thank you very much. And we're just can hear right now Mohammed Dif giving a statement in the Al-Aqsa TV. Let's hear what he has to say.
وأننا نعمل وفق سيناريوهات وخطط مسبقة لا نتعامل بردة فعل رعناء كما يفعل قادة العدو المجرم، وقد بذلنا كل جهد ممكن، وإننا واثقون من نصر الله لنا، ينصر من يشاء وهو العزيز الرحيم. يا أمتنا ويا أبناء شعبنا، نقدر لكم وقفتكم وتلاحمكم مع المقاومة، واعلموا أننا بكم بعد الله أقوى، وأنهم لن يضروكم إلا أذى، وأن النصر مع الصبر، وأن النصر صبر ساعة، وأنه لم يكن ليتحقق هذا النصر وهذا الإنجاز الكبير لولا صمودكم
What we hear is more is kind of like more of propaganda. He's basically praising the people of Gaza for their resistance. He's saying that they will surely are going to win. They are not going to conduct the same way the Israelis are conducting the way they fighting this fight. He's quoting phrases from Quran, supposed to praise or to encourage people in the fight.
إنا لننصر رسلنا والذين آمنوا في الحياة الدنيا ويوم يقوم الأشهاد. أخوكم القائد العام لكتاب الشهيد عز الدين قسام أبو خالد محمد دياب الضيف 29/7/2014.
He's just finished his statement. What was this message? Why we know that Mohammed Dif basically was trying to get to a ceasefire with Israel. He is actually urging Hamas to go to a ceasefire. How come he's coming out with this statement?
Look, Hamas is finally starting to understand that in the end of the day, he has no other option but to start comply with reality and to start dialogue with reality. We just talked about it the other night. And the most important thing is, as of now, Egypt. The keys are in Egypt, and Hamas knows that in the end of the day, Hamas may be fighting Israel from now to the end of times, but in the end of the day, if Hamas wants the passages to be open from Egypt to Gaza Strip, the keys are not in Israel, the keys are in Egypt. And therefore, Hamas starts to understand more and more that in the end of the day, he will have to be tuned to that reality.
He's not speaking a lot. He's not
speaking a lot.
And it is, let's say, in one way or another, it's a historic statement that he's coming out and saying, and he is saying that there won't be any ceasefire if the siege won't be over on the Gaza Strip. And he is also talking about the Muqawama and the people who will continue fighting for God and fighting for the civilians, right, and the people who are living in the Gaza Strip.
Notice that something was missing. At least I didn't hear it. Maybe I didn't hear the whole speech. I didn't hear him saying anything about the prisoners.
How come? How come the prisoners are not an issue? Because we're not hearing this a lot in the last few days. We're not only hearing about the siege, the blockade, we're not hearing anything about the prisoners.
Because what you see right now is a poker game. Everybody is sitting around the table. Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the Egyptians, Israel, the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Kuwaitis in the back line. And everybody is trying to play their cards the best way possible. Hamas starts to realize that in the end of the day, if he really wants to come with something, he has to adjust his level of expectations to what he may get. Now, in the end of the day, when you look, the whole issue of prisoners, the whole issue of fishing rights and harbor, all these things are totally out of the table at this point. Egypt is not going to provide, not only Israel, Egypt is not going to provide Hamas with these achievements. It's obvious. Now, Hamas may get out at this point with the reopening of the Rafah crossing. The Rafah crossing was open periodically. The Egyptians used to open it and close it. He may get the benefits or additional opening of the crossing from Israel to the Gaza Strip, but again, it will be kind of like reopening. All other things, for example, the issue of the prisoners, that was one of the most important conditions set by Hamas all along the way, are currently off the table. Because in the end of the day, in a poker game, comes the time where you have to reveal your cards. The time is very close. Hamas has to reveal its cards. It doesn't really have much cards to play with, relatively speaking. And he is in an inferior situation because, ironically, Hamas is fighting Israel, but Hamas was defeated, first and foremost, by another enemy that didn't even shoot one single shot, and that is Egypt.
Egypt is a key actor, maybe the key to this whole let's say, ceasefire operation situation that is now happening?
In a sense, certainly in the
And it's becoming, from what we're hearing, the new enemy for the Palestinians who are living in Gaza. Enemy, if we can.
Well, it's part of the struggle in the whole Arab world. I mean, you have the Egyptian and you have Hamas, but you have the struggle in Syria. You have the Saudis, and it's a whole complex. Yeah.
How do the Palestinians, and we have just 1 minute, how do the Palestinians in the West Bank are seeing this?
Well, from what we could see over the weekend, that actually Hamas is gaining more support in the West Bank. That maybe Hamas is getting weaker in the Gaza Strip, but from what we can see in the West Bank, from the protests and from the people that came out to protest, they see Hamas as actually striking quite a blow to Israel.
How come we're talking about now a new strong Hamas? Thank you very much.
I could add, I think there's no uprising on the West Bank.
That is correct.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming to the studio, and thank you, our viewers, for being with us tonight. Tomorrow we'll be here at the same time, same place from the Jaffa Port. Have a great night.